This Week in Radio Tech, episode 274 is brought to you by Lavo and the Crystal Clear Virtual Radio Console. Crystal Clear is the console with a multi-touch touchscreen interface. By Zipstream audio streaming processors and encoders, available with Omnia 9 processing technology. And by the Axia Radius AOIP audio console, standalone mixing and easy IP connections to other studios. Daniel Hyatt is finding ways to leverage his radio engineering experience. From his Director of Engineering position in Denver, Daniel is running a large DJ business, sound and light company, does global sourcing, and is even manufacturing custom LEDs for niche projects. What can we learn from Daniel's entrepreneurialism? Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Glad you're here. This is the show where we talk about everything from, microphones like this one or others to the light bulb at the top of the tower. And, hey, nowadays in radio, it's becoming a lot of stuff in between, from streaming to live television cameras like this one and even much more sophisticated stuff, and digital radio and HD and DAB and DRM and oh my goodness, it's just everywhere. And the engineers nowadays, there are fewer of them, and they have more responsibilities than ever before. Luckily, for the most part, equipment is generally less finicky, but that's not always true. So that's the summary of what the show is about. On our show today, on this episode, number 274, we've got a guest named Daniel Hyatt. And if you're on Facebook or if you're involved in social media, you're going to recognize this guy. He is really into a lot of engineering things and some other related and some unrelated enterprises as well. And I just think Daniel is a fantastic example of what today's motivated, excited, entrepreneurial engineer can do with his engineering skills. So we're going to talk to Daniel here in just a few minutes. As I said, I'm Kirk Harnack from my spacious studio here in Nashville, Tennessee. And coming to us live from the iHeart Radio Theater in New York City, it's Chris Tobin, my co-host. Hey, Chris, welcome in.
Thanks, Kirk. Yes, this is I'm in the control room for the iHeart Radio Theater. Behind me is a DigiDesign console, and there are several racks of DigiDesign Pro Tools HD chassis. For those of you in production, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I also have the graphics folks in here, and there's a few other things, but it's pretty cool. So I thought I'd wear a headset as a director type of thing.
Yeah, nice. Looks good. And they must have a surround mixing capability there, because I saw at least 3 speakers across the front of the mixing console.
Yes, I'm told they can do that. I only see the center, left, right. I don't see anything behind me here, but I'm assuming that's because they maybe do that when they have to. But yes, it's a nice facility. It's I mentioned it was a 5,500 square feet, 200 people. Very nice light grid. It's very versatile. They've done a lot. Matter of fact, this past week, Tuesday, I believe they did a interview with Keith Richards. So
really,
that's the latest from the iHeart Radio Theater.
I guess if you're anybody in the music business, you're going to stop by New York, and you're probably going to talk to iHeartRadio. And if you're going to perform or do anything live, or have a performance for execs or radio people or advertisers, that's where it's going to be held at, right?
Oh, absolutely. And keep in mind that it's also down here in Tribeca, so there's a lot of artists and musicians all around, and it's also the PC Richard sponsored theater. So you get the consumer stuff there too. So it's good.
Ah, okay, all right, cool. Hey, if you want to tell us more about that, I guess you're not in a position to give us a tour of that facility. It's just a good place that you happen to be. Tonight's SBE meeting there?
Yes, it is a SBE Chapter 15 New York City meeting. Linear Acoustics is here to talk about audio over IP and all the facets that it brings and the wonderful things you can do with it. So yeah, right now it's the dinner hour. So yeah, meeting starts at around 7 p.m. Eastern.
My stomach is grumbling. Dinner is being cooked right now at my house. It's upstairs, and I'm telling you, Grandma's here, and when Grandma's cooking, it smells so good.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good home cooking.
Hey, so Chris, let's bring in our guest. I don't know if you know this guy or not, because you're not on Facebook yourself. I don't see you, but Daniel Hyatt is here. He's an engineer from Denver, Colorado. Daniel, are you with us? Yeah, there he is.
I'm here. Yes, here I am.
Hey, glad to see you. You're in a television studio yourself there, aren't you?
Yes, we have a variety of functions here at Max Media Denver, radio, and of course we do a lot of online production as well, and we have a whole video team here. So yes, or as I like to call it, the engineering relaxation room.
Oh, well, it's not used 24 hours a day. How often does a room like that get used, would you say?
Primarily for editing, but about 5-10 hours a week, and then whenever I want to take a nap.
Okay. Now, are you in a actual studio, or are you in the control room, or is it kind of all in one? What's the situation?
We have several studios. This is one, we call this one the red room. Accordingly, this wall is actually red. We have another room that's a complete green screen, so we can chroma key people out, and that's where the production director for our visual works out of. So it's a pretty neat setup, and we keep adding on, so it's more and more every year.
Cool, cool. Well, Daniel, we're going to cover a bunch of stuff with you, including, for those of you in the audience, Daniel is a really interesting guy in the world of audio processing. And I know we talk a lot about processing on the show because, hey, in the radio business, that's what we deal with. We deal with audio. And Daniel actually owns an audio processing company. I did not know that until today. So we're going to hear a little bit about that story. We'll hear about Daniel's experience with Max Media, what he's doing there. He walked into an audio over IP situation when he took the job there. And then Daniel has some other interesting enterprises that I'd like to hear, just in terms of life and career, how Daniel, how you've taken your engineering career and leveraged that into some of the other stuff that you're doing. So we're going to talk with Daniel and Chris about those things here as we move along. Hey, our show is brought to you in part by the folks at Lavo, L-A-W-O. I know I spell that for you every time, but the reason I do is because it's a German company and it's pronounced Lavo. But it's spelled L-A-W-O. And that means if you want to go to the website for Lavo, you'll need to type in lawo.com. Now, Lavo is well known for making these big, honking, beautiful consoles for live events, for television, for multi-track, and for surround sound, 5.1, 7.1, and surround sound, and so forth. But they also have a line of radio consoles for smaller applications like radio stations. And they have a line that is called their Crystal Clear console line. Now, these are pretty amazing. What they've done is they've taken the mixing engine, the smarts, the audio I/O, network in and out. They've taken that engine, which is just a little one rack unit box. It's really stuffed with capability and features. They've taken that box, and rather than control it with their normal crystal surface, their work surface, you can control it instead with a multi-touch touchscreen monitor. You run an app that the folks at Lavo have developed that shows you an 8-fader console on screen, plus all the buttons that you need. And for a long time, it's been kind of a brainchild. I'm not saying I invented it, but it's been a dream of mine, personally, to see a console that's done on a touchscreen. And as touchscreen technology has gotten better and better, I mean, I started thinking about this back in the early 90s. And, touchscreen technology was kind of awful then, and it really couldn't be done then. We certainly didn't have multi-touch capability. But now, as touchscreen technology has gotten better, the folks at Lavo have built up this thing called the Crystal Clear console. It has 10 touches, 10 touch points. You can put all 10 fingers. If you got 10 fingers, you can put all 10 of them on there at the same time. If you could do that, move faders up and down, more likely you're going to be moving one or two things up and down at a time. And they've really designed this app to be for touch, not for a mouse, but for touch. And because the console is designed in software, it means that the functions can be really tailored. They're not stuck with a hardware platform that they just have to deal with this button or that button, okay, we need a button to push when you do this. Well, it's software. They can make the buttons completely contextual. So if you're dealing with, say, a microphone input from another studio, you touch an options button and you get options on the screen that pop up that have to do only with what you would want to do with an options button for a mic in another studio. Every fader gives you the ability to have a back channel, so you can have mix minus, for example, going to codecs or to telephone hybrids for people who are off-site. You can have a headphone feed properly mixed for talent that's either in your studio or in adjacent studio. The back of the unit, the back of the rack mount part, has some mic inputs, line level, AES inputs, line level and AES outputs. It also has a network connection, which is the Ravenna AOIP standard, which is also AES 67 compatible. So as more AES 67 devices come on the market, you would be able to connect those to and from the the crystal clear console. Plus, redundant power supplies are available, and there's some GPIO on the back of the mix unit itself. So if you need some tally lights for the studio or for your own control room, you've got those as well. You need to start an old-fashioned tape machine, a cart machine. Wouldn't that be not interesting? Touch a button on a touch screen and start a cart machine. You want to know more about the crystal clear console? Go to lavo.com, LAWO.com. That page right there. Navigate your way to that page under radio consoles and watch the video that Mike Dosh did. It's in the upper right-hand corner where he talks about the benefits of designing and using a console that's designed this way. Thanks to Lavo for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Chris Tobin's with us from New York, from the iHeartRadio Theater, and also Daniel Hyatt is here from Denver, Colorado. Chris, now you're not a big social media guy. Have you heard of this Daniel Hyatt character before?
I have not. I have not heard of him. No.
Wow.
Social media and I don't get along well.
well, I'm kind of a social media freak, and so is Daniel Hyatt. So Daniel, again, welcome in, and so I'm looking forward to hearing your story. You were telling me earlier. Well, tell it. I gave a little tease earlier. I said you own a processor company, and that's really cool. Can you begin by tell us about? Oh, two of them. Tell us about that.
No, I do indeed.
You do?
Well, it started out, I started out with a fascination about audio processing back when I was about 9-10 years old. My parents were always encouraging me to experiment with electronics and mechanics and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So it eventually led to, I heard a mix show on the radio. I heard something on the radio where they transitioned from a song into an instrumental. Well, for a young person's mind, you're not mixing two records together. What you're thinking is somebody removed the vocals. So simultaneously, a new gentleman moved into the house next door to my parents, and he happened to own the two local radio stations where I grew up. And so I started talking to him about it at, I think, a yard sale as he moved in. And he said, well, that might be a graphic equalizer. It might have to do with this other thing. I don't know a lot about this technology, but you can come to the radio station and check it out. So ding, all of a sudden the light bulb went on, and I got in this radio thing, and I started chugging along. So as I went throughout the years in radio there at that small station in my youth and my teenage years, there was another engineer named Chuck Springer, and he's really was my mentor as I was younger. And Chuck allowed me to go ahead and play with audio processors. He kind of facilitated that whole process there. And he had mentioned to me there was this company called Nat Hines, and he said, well, I acquired this audio processing company, and they have some really neat designs, and he kind of showed me a couple different things. And as we went along, he said, I'm not as interested in all of this processing as you are. Maybe you'd be interested in taking over the company, but as a couple of stipulations in taking over the company, you need to make sure you're developing these products and make sure you're out there selling them. I don't just want to give this away to somebody or hand it off to somebody that's not going to continue on. So from there on, I've perpetuated that company. And we've rolled off a couple of products. We have some that we've revised designs on, but the most outstanding design I've had, in my personal opinion, has been the Comp Rock, and that's a composite FM clipper and limiter that we have out, and it's in over 100 radio stations throughout the U.S. and major markets.
Now, you buzzed that pretty fast. I want to make sure I got this straight. So the engineer, this guy, Chuck Springer, that you worked with, and he kind of mentored you along, he somehow, I remember one of the founders of Nat Hines passed away, right?
Sure, Steve.
Steve Nat.
Steve, yeah, and Chuck Springer purchased the assets of the company. Is that right?
That's correct, from Steve's wife.
Gotcha. Okay. And was that in, say, the mid or late 90s when that happened?
It was right about that time. I think it was in the mid 90s.
Okay.
But it would put me in middle school, actually, at that time.
And I was into my contract engineering career at that time, and I remember working for a few stations that had Nat Hines processors, and I remember that. Okay, so these are kind of inexpensive, but they're very clean sounding. And other people in maybe I was on CompuServe at that time, but people would comment from time to time that, hey, these can sound really good if you set them up right. They're very clean sounding. But my experience with Nat Hines processors was pretty limited. So you worked with Chuck Springer. He showed you this stuff, and now tell me about the Comproc, because I
it's a great box.
Yeah, it's apparently in some big markets, and I haven't seen one.
See, Chris has heard of me. He just didn't know.
No. I will tell you the story that why I know what I'm saying. I used to work with Steve Nat in the early days of the 80s, and he was using my radio station as a test bed for his processing, and the Comproc was one of them, the Mike Mays, the Tri Mays, and a few others, and the A Mays. And yes, and Steve, I still have the napkin from the Mr. Donut coffee shop at 2 o'clock in the morning with a schematic on how to hot rod a Texar Prism.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. No, Steve. Yeah, Steve was best friends with the director of engineering for the company I worked with, and he'd send me these boxes, and the format we were was a jazz format. On the FM, and the AM was a full service music news talk, and we were hot rodded like crazy. And I had 3 visits from the FCC as a result of it.
What were they about?
Well, apparently our competitors felt we were overmodulating and operating illegally, and I tried to explain to them. I said, no, you see, this is the first generation of a digital approach to audio processing that keeps it clean but gives it very finite control. And the Tri-Maze, Comproc, A-Maze combination can really sound is a really powerful package. And I'm glad to hear that things are still moving along with the product.
So this Comproc seems to be the real surviving product from the original Nat Hines company. Is that right, Daniel?
That's correct, and it's the product that everybody asks for. With the Tri-Maze, we had quite a bit of interest, but as we moved along through the digital products, obviously analog products kind of took it by the wayside. However, the Comproc is still going strong. In fact, I've had several different DOEs throughout a variety of groups in the U.S. mention that they still prefer utilizing the Comproc as a final processor or clipper, aside from using other major manufacturers' final clipper or composite clipper.
Now, a lot of myself and certainly a lot of other folks who watch or visit this podcast, we're familiar with composite clippers. And we realize that there are, some differences, some improvements, for example, on the original, what was it, CP803 from Modulation Sciences. A lot of us had those. But I got to believe now that there's been improvements and people like the Comproc. Daniel, can you explain some of the technicalities of why the Comproc is very popular and effective?
Sure. Now, the Comproc, unlike many other processors where you're literally just clipping the audio, that's it, clipping the audio in some cases with the older processors, actually clipping the pilot. With the Comproc, we have a 4-stage process. So the first process is a soft limiter. The second stage is a hard limiter, followed by a soft clipper and then a hard clipper. And the advantage to that is we have many markets like Denver. Las Vegas is another market where we experience a severe amount of multipath distortion, and a lot of that can be induced by the composite clipping. So by utilizing the limiting section in the Comproc, you don't sacrifice loudness for avoiding that multipath distortion. Now, in other markets where that's not such a critical item, you can actually utilize both the limiting section and the clipping section to gain more loudness. And we've had pretty good success with many customers actually picking up what they swear by as more than 3 dB of loudness with no noticeable distortion.
Interesting.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious about, both Omnia and I believe Orban have introduced processors in which you can turn off the upper sideband of the stereo left minus right signal. And because multipath occurs first at higher demodulated frequencies in the baseband than lower, just because of they represent a bigger portion of time. Can a Comproc being used to reduce multipath work in conjunction with single sideband stereo being used to reduce multipath, or would they fight each other on that issue?
Sure, I've only experimented with it once myself. I've had other people that say they've had success with it. They didn't tell me which processor. My experience is with an Omnia 11 with a single sideband, and putting it on a scope, I didn't see any unusual anomalies. But it should be able to be used with both single and dual sideband.
Interesting. I'm sorry, Chris Tobin, I think I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say the Comproc, you could squeeze a lot of audio or perceived loudness beyond 3 dB, but 3 dB is about the sweet spot. And it's a pretty cool box and how it shapes the waveform. I'll just say it that way. That's all I'm going to give away.
Wow. I was always used to a composite processor. And you know what? It's probably worthwhile. We may have left a few of our listeners behind talking about composite processing. Chris Tobin, could you take just a minute and in the New York City market there, I'm sure, if not now, at least sometime in the past, everybody's probably running some composite processing there. How is composite processing, Chris, different from your usual left channel, right channel processing and stereo generation? What does composite processing get for an FM? And this is only for FM, but what does it get for an FM broadcaster?
Well, it gets you a little more loudness because it's the final step of the audio before it gets demodulated in the receiver. And yes, if you took the detector output of an FM tuner and looked at the composite signals of all the stations here in New York City back in the day, they were pretty much flat line, very little grassy, hairy lines above the tops and bottoms. But it gives you an opportunity to sort of squeeze out a little more loudness. Also gives you better peak control at the very end because remember, your left and right audio gets multiplexed together with the 19 kilohertz to create all the wonderful things at stereo, and then it becomes what's called a multiplexed or composite signal. It's about, say, 190 kilohertz wide type of thing. And what happens is the last stage, Eric Small came up with the CP803, which allowed you to legally, as mentioned earlier, legally clip the composite without pinching the pilot, as the phrase is known as. If you watch your modulation monitor, put it on the pilot injection, and you watch the modulation of the pilot, the injection level, and if you're pinching the pilot, you'll see the needle deflect back and forth, which is not preferred by the commission. So composite clipping allowed you an extra couple of dB or half a dB here and there, and the loudness back in the day, and to this day it's still the same, it offered you a more competitive edge. And it did make the sound a little more denser, but with today's digital processing, you can do a lot before you get to the composite. And that's the Comproc gives you several stages of how to sort of sweeten, tweak, and squeeze out a little more just to give yourself a signature sound, as I like to call it.
So Daniel, my own experience is very limited compared to yours, but in my experience in setting up processing with a composite clipper, so we're talking, most of my, I should say, the bulk of my processing experience was when I was a contract engineer in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And I would find that if I did heavy processing with the station's processor, whatever brand it might be, if I did heavy multiband processing, usually a composite processor, and remember I was typically using a CP803, a composite processor would not help much. In fact, it might do more harm than good, at least in my experience. I may have been doing it wrong. However, if I did lighter processing on the station and depended upon the composite processor then to amp the loudness up, I got a more desirable result, depending on what the station was looking for. If they were looking for that suck and pump multi-band process sound, well, then I would do that, and I didn't gain much from a composite processor. But if they were looking for not a multi-band sound, but a kind of a wideband sound or an easier sound, then I could gain them some loudness with a composite processor. Tell me where I was right and tell me where I need to be educated on in my experience.
Well, audio processing can take a variety of forms. So you can have a composite processor and you can have a final on-air processor, and you can have two completely different settings. You can completely destroy the sound before it gets to the composite processor, or you can decide to trim it a little bit when it gets to the final composite processor. Now, you probably heard the theory, bad in, bad out. So if we put horrible audio into something, then it doesn't matter what we do to it. We're not going to make it much better within reason. I know there's a couple technologies out there. I know Lyft has some of the declipping and things, but for all intents and purposes, if I get something really bad and I shove it into the audio processor, it's going to sound bad coming out no matter what. So keeping with that thought in mind, if you start out with great audio and you're very gentle, I like to think of audio as baking a pizza, if you will. So when you're making a pizza, you roll out the dough and you do the dough right, and then you put on just the right amount of toppings. If you put too many toppings on, or your dough is too thick, then when you bake it later on, according to recipe, it's going to come out really doughy, or rather all your ingredients are going to be baked wrong. However, if you're very gentle and you put the right amount called for by recipe on that pizza, and you roll the dough out properly, and then you send it through that oven. Well, through the oven, you can crank it up a little bit. You can maybe make it a little toastier, or maybe even want to burn it just a slight bit. That's kind of how audio processing is. So if I start out with nice clean signal and then I just beat it up in the automatic gain control, or I really beat it up in the limiter, and then I hand it off the composite clipper, there's nothing left to do with it. It's already so abused by the time it gets there that there's not much more you can do with it other than, just kind of run it over with the car again. So that's the theory, and that's exactly what you were saying is if you're gentle going through the right steps and you finally get to that final composite processor whose job it is to take that final audio and give it a little more density, give it a little more loudness, kind of shave those peaks off, then you're going to get a great product. Whereas if you go through and just annihilate the audio, hyper compress it, then by the time it gets to the composite clipper, you can do as much as you want. You might gain some loudness, but you're going to end up with something that sounds extremely horrible.
Yeah. That you confirm what I was thinking, and I thought about it such that if I'm using the composite clipper to clip off, let's call them accidental peaks or occasional peaks, or even kind of some regular peaks, I was okay with that. And the distortion, any distortion added by the clipper, and again, I wasn't using a Comproc, which is a better design. But any distortion I was adding was really pretty temporary and short-lived. But if I already had dense audio and I'm trying to get into that with a clipper, well, everything I do, every time it clips something, it's clipping what is, by golly, real audio at this point. It's not accidental overshoots. It's not overshoots that got by. It's not even just a little bit of grass tickling the clipper. It's real audio at that point because all the audio is up loud. So good, you confirmed, I guess, really what I thought about it. But I think it's really intriguing. I'm so eager to try out a Comproc at some point that because it uses 4 stages of composite processing, you can actually start to do more with it and not destroy the audio that was coming in. Have I kind of got that right?
You're absolutely right. And I want to add a couple of comments onto what you were just talking about. And that's that when I talk to folks and I go out and I've done consulting work in the past, or even here at Max Media, when we talk about audio processing, obviously we want a product that's non-fatiguing to the listener. We want something oftentimes that's extremely loud. We want to sound a particular way. The best way I can explain that to programmers is I give them a handful of marbles and I say, here we go. We have a slot. Your treble is 1 through 4. Your bass is 1 through 4. Your loudness is 1 through 4. Now you need to move these marbles around and put them in the slots here, and you got to tell me what you want more and less of, or rather how you want this adjusted. Now, when we start setting the processing, oftentimes a great example is the other day, the program director said, "Hey, can we get the station just a hair louder?" And I already knew we were kind of up against the wall, and I didn't want to push into the range of distortion, so I said, "Okay, we can back down on the bass and I can make it louder, or I can't do anything else, or else it's going to go into the distortion territory." So I said, okay, we'll back down the bass. Well, we eliminated one slight attribute from the spectrum and added another. So when we started dealing with that magic box that's the modulation, and we're able to have a push and pull, it's much easier for people to understand that is, okay, well, I turn down the bass, it's not going to blow my speakers out in a live sound environment. It's kind of the same thing with processing. I turn down the bass, reduces the density a little bit, gives me a little more overhead to work with when we get to that composite processor.
Gotcha. The bucket's only so big. What do you want? You want to fill it up more? Great, we got to take something else out. Daniel, I've noticed that you are the kind of guy that likes to try and use and implement different brands and different models of processors. What's your thought process when you're thinking about what brand to put in, what model, how you're going to adjust it? What cost justification is there for this station versus that station when you're consulting somebody? Tell me about that thought process.
Well, we have several really solid brands out there. Obviously, we have the Telos Omnia products, and those have been around for a long time, and they have their signature sound.
Did we lose Daniel, or is it just me?
No, I think we lost Daniel. Well, I have a frozen screen. We're back to you on video.
All right. Well, we'll try to get. Well, let's ask the same question to you, Chris. Different processing brands and models. You've dealt with just about everything out there. If somebody comes to you today and says, "Hey, we've got a new X format station in Southern New Jersey. We want to be competitive with the stations around us, and maybe those coming from Philly or somewhere." What's your advice? Where do you start?
Well, I first start with what's your budget, and then second, what is it you're trying to sound like that is catching the ears of others that you believe is the market you want to serve. Because, you know, let's say South Jersey, there are several stations in South Jersey that cover easily into Philadelphia and Atlantic City, Long Beach Island, and Ocean City, and you know, all the stations are competing. Now, do you want to sound like the very, you know, compressed, very dense station, or do you want to sound a little bit in the middle but have a sound that sort of stands out? The processors I usually start with, typically, if the format's like a top 40, ooh, there's a bug flying around here. Top 40 format, we'll call it, or a pop music, I usually suggest go with the Omnia. It'll give you a nice sound that's dense but sparkles and jumps out at you. But if your station does sort of a softer music, I sometimes find that the Orban products, believe it or not, I actually have a certain how do you say it? There's a certain characteristic curve or nuance. It gives a nice soft sound. It's very, very clean and sharp, but it works. But it's hard. It's hard because everybody has a different hears things differently. I mean, I've actually used some Aphex processors, some older ones, and people have been like, "This thing sounds great." I'm like, "Yeah, they don't make it anymore, but it does sound really good." So, you know, it's a matter of taste. And as I've always said, the new digital systems are so powerful, so finite in control that you cannot start at +1, 2, or 3. You got to sort of start at -1, -2, -3, and then find your sound from there.
Daniel, you're back with us. Same question to you. Talk to us about the process you go through to choose a model and a brand. Chris started out with budget. Where do you start?
Well, budget makes a lot of sense, and you know, I like to think that I can accomplish almost any sound with a fairly limited budget or with a very large budget. It's just going to come down to cleanliness and loudness when you get there. So I would say I would agree with Chris when it comes to Orban having that nice smooth sound when you're trying to get something that's like a classical or a jazz. And with the Omnia products, my experience has been they're pretty loud. The 11 is extremely loud. And then the third big dog, in my opinion, would be the Vorsys products by Wheatstone. And I am impressed by their approach, as a lot of processors we've seen in the past and that are currently out there and do sound really good in their own right, deal with 5 and 6 band compressors and limiters and AGC, whereas in the Vorsys and the Aurora, we're seeing a 31 band limiter, which is quite a bit different approach. And I think that's something that can be challenging, and each processor really offers its own challenge. But I think it can be challenging to a lot of broadcast engineers because so many of us get on the thought process where it's like, okay, we've got our lows, we've got our highs, we've got our mids, we've got our mid highs, and so forth. Where dealing with the Vorsys products, you kind of have to take the approach more like you're setting sound on a stage, like a live audio engineer. So that box also has its own unique set of traits, and I feel like there sometimes when I'm dealing with very particular sounds, if I have a rock station where I really want to bring out the certain drums, then you know, the Vorsys works out. Classical formats, spoken word formats like an NPR, or even like a AAA format sounds extremely good on there. If I'm dealing with certain formats like a hip hop format, you know, the 11 has a huge low end to it. So when folks say, I've got to have this thundering low end that's going to blow my speakers out, and if they've got the budget, then the 11. Now, aside from all of that, if people say, hey, I've only got a couple $1,000, I can afford a final processor, maybe they even only have something like an Orban 8100, then I turn to things that are more consumer-based. And a couple of my favorites are the DBX Drive Rack series, the PA Plus, and they have a newer model that's out now. Also, the Behringer SPL 3220, which is $125, but it's a 2-band multi-band that works phenomenal. So if you put a drive rack before the Behringer box and then run it into just about anything else, you can get a very signature sound without spending too much money.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, good to hear those thoughts. Hey, if you're watching or listening, this is This Week in Radio Tech, episode 274. I'm Kirk Harnack, along with Daniel Hyatt, our guest, and Chris Tobin is coming to us live tonight from the iHeartRadio Theater in New York City, where the SBE meeting is about to start in the next 15 or 20 minutes or so. Hey, our show is brought to you in part, and this is actually, you know what, before I say the ad, I want to riff just for one thought on what Daniel just said about, you know, different philosophies from different processing manufacturers. You even look at a company, and I know that they're my employer, the guys at Omnia, and you've got a number of different designers, processing designers. You've got Cornelius Gould and Frank Foti and Rob Dye, Mark Manolio, and Leif Clayson. And a recent addition to the family is Hans von Zutphen, who has been interviewed on this show before. So actually, about all of them have. So and they're very different processors. What comes from Hans, his contribution, what comes from Leif, what comes from Frank, and what comes from Corny. These are all different things. So it's kind of amazing that even within the same company, you got different ideas about how to do processing, what sound you're looking for. The good news for the radio engineer is that you've got choices. Not only do you have a choice of different companies, but you also have different designers at different companies, and you can choose your poison, choose your tools, your toolbox based on demos and what you're comfortable with and what you like. I guess I would close that thought with saying that, hey, be open to trying different things. Give things a whirl. Some of these things you can demo. The companies will do demos, or dealers will do demos, and you can try different things on your station. Don't be afraid to reach out and try something different. The first time I ever got my hands on any Omnia processor, I was so used to using Orabands that I had a hard time navigating around and getting the sound I wanted. It took me a few weeks to kind of get that figured out, and I got good at it there at that point. Hey, our show is brought to you by the folks at Zipstream. Zipstream is a new brand, a new mark of the Telos Alliance. And if you're doing streaming, we're saying stream like you mean it, because, man, more and more people are listening to streaming, whether it's Pandora or some other service, or whether it's their favorite radio station. I'm spending a lot of my time in my office here listening to my own radio stations via streaming, and sometimes I'll tune into other ones that I like, stations I miss. For example, when I lived in Kentucky, I listened a lot to WLW in Cincinnati and WHAS in Louisville. Love those stations. Also WLS in Chicago and WBBM in Chicago. Love those stations. So I'll listen to those on streaming. It's becoming more and more important. Even my little stations in Mississippi, we get people listening all over the place to those stations. Even our stations in American Samoa. Some of you may know that I'm part owner of a couple stations there. We have plenty of people streaming that. Of course, in the United States, there's people of Samoan descent living on the West Coast especially, and even right here in Nashville. Point is, streaming is important, and if you want to do streaming, you want to do it right, you want to make it sound good, man, don't take some old processor that you bought on eBay and think that's going to get you as good as you can sound on your stream, because the tools are out there and available, and they're not that expensive now. Telos Zipstream brand has a whole range now of products, and I'll just run through them here for you. There's a new one in the mix, so pay attention. Whether you like to do it with hardware or do it with software, Zipstream offers either way to do that. You can a couple of hardware products. There's the Zipstream R1. Now, we introduced this product calling it the Telos ProStream. I've got one here at my desk, and in fact, I'll tell you what. I'll take the camera off and show it to you here. So here's the Zipstream. It's the ProStream. This is labeled ProStream, but now it's called the Zipstream R1 to get it to be to get the branding to match up, and it will process one audio stream, and it will make two different encodings. So you can encode in, say, MP3 at 128 kilobits, and you can encode in AAC HEAC V2 at 56 kilobits if you want to. And so you get two streams out of it. You can send those streams to up to 4 different locations, for geodiversity, to different CDNs if you want to. And so that's a hardware streamer. You plug it in, you dial, you put in the settings, and you forget about it. It just sits there and works. No PC involved. And the audio can come into it via analog or AES or LiveWire. So there's different versions available that way. So that's the Zipstream R1, R meaning rack mount 1. Now there's a new product. It's the Zipstream R2, and it's on the website. It's a beautiful one-rack unit box. It actually it has the flavor, the look of one of our linear acoustic products. The linear acoustic engineers were very helpful in the design of the hardware. Well, it can run up to 8 stream, and it can take up to 8 programs in, and then encode in multiple ways after that, after it takes those in. 8 audio processors built in, and the audio processing on each individual stream can be either our 3-band Omnia AX processing or the Leif Clayson's Omnia 9 processing. That's available. It's an add-on option. That's available for every stream. amazing. So this new processor, this new streaming encoder, the Zipstream R2 rack mount, and it's the R/2. It's beautiful box, and you're going to see a lot of them out in the field, I believe, at some big broadcasters. Also, it is capable of doing this multi-rate streaming, so it's compatible with HLS, and so you can send multi-streams to the stream server provider, the CDN, and your listeners can automatically get the right stream rate for their device. So in a desktop environment, they get the high rate stream. Mobile, they might get a lower rate stream, but it's selected automatically for them. Now, there's two other products, the Zipstream X2, that's software, and the Zipstream 9X2. The difference is the 9X2 is Leif Claeson's Omnia 9 processing. I'm running both of these at my own radio stations, and there's a ton of them out there. Check them all out if you would. On the website, just go to telosalliance.com, click on Telos, and click on the streaming products, and scroll down, and you will see for yourself 4 different choices now for stream processing and encoding. 2 hardware, 2 software, whichever is your favorite. Thanks to Telos and Zipstream for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Chris Tobin is with us. Chris, you got to go soon, or can you hang with us for another 15 minutes or so?
Well, actually, I got about another 5 minutes, and I have to run into the next room.
All right. Hey, we're going to Daniel, can we move on to how you have taken your engineering career and leverage that into some other areas of interest, money making for yourself, building a career. Kind of lead us into how you got into that.
Will you restate the question? My internet connection dropped. I think somebody other
no problem. Yeah,
file.
So you know from your Facebook postings and from knowing you personally, you're the entrepreneurial guy. So you've taken these skills that you learned beginning when you were 9 or 10 years old, and with Chuck Springer helping you out. You've taken these radio engineering skills and you're leveraging that into some other business opportunities that are keeping you interested and excited, and hopefully putting some money in your pocket. Tell us about that process.
Well, I try to keep money in my pocket. That's a good idea. I've always been infatuated with audio, and what comes along with audio, it ends up being music, and what comes along with music is DJing. So I've been fortunate enough to grow my DJ skills throughout the years in conjunction with the engineering skills. So I even host some mix shows on the radio stations here, which is a little bit of fun. And I have an audio-visual production company. We send out up to 7 DJs at any given time throughout mostly weekends. And we also do large format sound and light for a variety of concerts around and large-scale events. So leading on from the audio-visual production aspect, which came about from the DJing, which came about from the radio, I encountered another gentleman who's now one of my business partners in a separate endeavor, and that's global sourcing. So when LED lights started to come about, I said, I need to get these for my production company, but they're a little expensive. So going along the regular route of buying and selling things, I became a dealer, and then later on a manufacturer representative for several companies, and finally said, I can probably make these myself, but unfortunately, I don't speak Mandarin, and most of the stuff's made in China, and I don't really know what to do. So believe it or not, I hopped in the elevator maybe 20 minutes after kind of telling myself that, and I ran into a gentleman named Ka, who's my very good friend and business partner in the global sourcing, and he just said, hey, who are you and what do you do? And I told him, and he said, oh, that's neat. I source products internationally. And I said, well, that's interesting. I've been wanting to do this. So we sat down, we had lunch, and I kid you not, over about 48 hours, we put this whole business plan together, executed it, and now for several years, we've been importing and manufacturing our own LED lights. We've been doing promotional materials, things like blankets for Delta Airlines. We've been doing promotional materials for AARP, JP Morgan. So there's a whole growth of endeavors that have spurred out of radio, but as one thing leads to another. And that continues today. I was just on the phone with him a while ago, and now we're sourcing LED screens that are going all over downtown Denver, and we're lighting up entire buildings. And that's something completely separate from radio, but I like to bring it back. So I'll have to post some pictures on the internet for everybody to see. But now I'm going about and actually LEDing out all of our studios here. So our mic arms underneath the tables, pictures in conference rooms, TVs, everything has LEDs. So that's been my latest technical endeavor.
Wow. That is just fascinating. taking that entrepreneurial spirit that got you into DJing and the sound and light. And Chris Tobin, I've never been the kind of engineer that was interested in going out and doing and DJing. Although, come think of it, in high school I was asked to, and I did in high school, but I never made a business out of it. How about you, Chris? You ever turned your engineering skills into something kind of tangential?
No, I'd have to say I haven't. I've just enjoyed the work around. I've worked with a couple of engineering firms and come up with some wacky ways of doing radio and TV, and that's just where things have gone for me. I've just enjoyed doing it that way. Help people out, often consulting, and over the years, it's just paid off in that fashion.
Hey, I know you're going to have to go soon. Tell me real quickly the subject of tonight's SBE meeting in New York. Ken Tankel is there.
Ken Tankel, Linear Acoustics, a division of the Telos Alliance, I guess we'd call it, a subsidiary. We believe we're talking about audio over IP, the benefits, and how it's implemented, and usually turns into questions of distribution and why should I do that over something more traditional, and really does it work as well as people claim, and why there's so many different ways of doing it. And the AES 67 question will come up. Then there's the other competing protocols that are out there, and it should be fun, actually, because the New York audience, every time we've done these, has brought out some interesting questions, and I know the manufacturers who have walked away going, "Wow, we never thought of it in that fashion." But you guys are actually making it work that way. I only said because we had Gates Air here a couple of months ago on a similar topic with their product line, and the gentleman was very good who presented it. Ted Nahill, I'm sure people know the name.
Yeah, I know Ted. Sure.
After the meeting, he was actually talking with a few of the folks, a couple of the TV guys, and he's like, "Let me get this straight. You're doing what and how and it works?" And they're like, "Yeah, actually it does, but we can't find anybody who makes a product that does it." He's like, "Yeah, I can see why, but okay, I get it." So every time we do some of these audio over IP, video over IP presentations, some strange things come out, which is good. Get you thinking, but it's fun.
I think that one thing we're going to find, and Daniel, I want to ask you to chime in on this in a few minutes, is that some manufacturers have just jumped into audio or video over IP with both feet. That's their world, and it's end to end. Other manufacturers have taken their legacy systems and then adapted them to some kind of IP connectivity. Either if between studios or between the routers and switches and the endpoints and things, but they're a mixture of legacy TDM or other protocols and IP. And I really believe that if you do the hybrid mix thing, you're going to end up being frustrated in the long run. That end-to-end IP is going to end up being the way to go. Now I realize there's transition time. You've got a bunch of this equipment, you got to make it talk to that equipment. You're going to have a hybrid system for a while, but move to total IP and because that's where the world's going to.
You could do a hybrid, but it's all about it's application based. But the smaller, if you're a smaller operation that doesn't have many demanding things, if you will, demanding workflows, you can go hybrid IP, TDM, benefit from it for at least a short period of time and make the transition much easier. But if you're a large facility like say a Cumulus or an iHeartMedia or CBS or Entercom, doing the hybrid approach is probably at this day and age is probably suicidal. I would think your best bet is to really think, as you point out, Kirk, do IP end to end and just figure out the workflow and say, okay, what makes the best sense and how to implement it. And you benefit greater that way than you would just trying to make a transition excuse and then all of a sudden one day wake up and find yourself in trouble.
Yeah. Chris, thanks for joining us. I know you have to go. I'm going to hang around with Daniel Hyatt for a few more minutes.
All righty. Well, Daniel, good luck with the Comproc. I'm glad to hear things are still going on with that. I remember in the early days, so it was fun.
Thanks, Chris.
Folks,
I was going to say, it's okay to be square.
Oh, yes. I know that one. Oh, that's good. That is good.
Good deal. Okay, Chris, we'll see you next week. And so we're still talking to Daniel Hyatt here from Denver, Colorado. He's the director of engineering for Max Media, and he does a number of other things as well. We were just getting into talking about that. Daniel, okay, so DJ, sound and light, you've designed lighting systems, you're even global sourcing, and now you're kind of having a company actually make LEDs to your specs, to your specifications. What of the different things you're doing, what would you say you're the most excited about long term?
Well, I look at everything long term. I really look at everything medium term because I know there's a finite amount of time we can apply to things. So LEDs, for example, there's still a huge LED boom, and there still will be for probably the next 4 or 5 years. But long term, in 20 years, there's going to be the big companies like your Philips that are going to take over, and they're going to facilitate all those commercial builds. And there's going to be some very specific manufacturers that facilitate the LED lighting we see on stages and nightclubs, things like that. So I'm excited about that right now. What I'm really excited about is kind of new media, because it still ties back in with my broadcast experience, still ties back in with kind of my techie nerdy side, and it allows me to continue to implement new ideas. So one of the projects I'm working on right now involves online newspapers, and it involves online broadcast of local sports, and then it also ties in with the local radio stations. So we're starting to get into those rural communities and be able to tie in with a lot of folks who aren't AES compatible at all. They're still in the analog days. They still haven't experimented a whole lot with internet, and we're really reaching out to the Wild West and doing some new media approaches. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm excited about. It's not what's on my plate in front of me. That's there, and it's moving forward, and we've got a plan, and we've got to think about it properly. But it's what's the next step? What am I going to wake up tomorrow and envision? And then over the next couple of months or the next year or so, how am I going to be able to develop that? So it's exciting. It's like sitting back when you're a music connoisseur and saying, what's the next big hit going to be? What's it going to sound like? And being that excited.
Yeah, I hear you. So let's apply your comments there to a couple of subjects. Let's talk about what you might see as the future of streaming and how broadcasters can not mess that up, but let's see, how can broadcasters do something meaningful that'll keep them connected with audiences and make their content easily available and intriguing. So streaming, and then let's, in the back of your mind here, and we'll get to it before the end of the show, think about how other technologies will replace telephony for listeners and viewers to talk to the content creators. So what we now have is talk shows, and people participate typically via telephone, cell phone, some talk shows taking Skype calls and such. What's going to come along, next after? I mean, my daughter, I don't know if she'd ever pick up a phone and call a DJ or a talk show. I don't know that she would. So I'm always being, working for Telus. I'm always thinking, what's going to be next? What's it going to look like? So anyway, back to the streaming thing. What are your thoughts about streaming over the future?
Well, I think right now streaming and traditional terrestrial broadcasting really go hand in hand. So a great example is, let's say you have an AM radio station and you think, okay, well, I'm starting to lose a little bit of listenership. There's not as much interest. Well, now all of a sudden you can provide that high definition stream, and people can get it in their vehicles now. They can stream it over an IP card, or folks can stream it at their desk at the office. And they can also listen to the traditional radio broadcast. Now, when I start to think of this, I like to use small towns like the town I grew up in La Junta, Colorado, where there's about 8,000 people or so. And a huge portion of the broadcast week there is contributed to local sports. And those local sports, Billy Bob and his sister and his grandma and his aunt, everybody wants to listen to that game. So they're driving around, they can listen to it on the radio. But they can also hop online now and listen to it, stream it through their phone. They can get added content. So we have those details, like maybe it's a basketball game and they've got assists and they've got 3-point shots and they've got field goal percentages. So you start to get that added content. And then furthermore, maybe somebody missed the game. They can now go home, or they can wait 6 months or a week, or maybe even years down the road after little Johnny's grown up and gone through college. Maybe he's in the NFL now, or maybe he's just doing something completely different and he has kids and you want to go back and watch that game. Now we have the content storage available, and that's huge. And so radio stations and broadcasters in general being able to tie in that digital content now, when I still feel like the terrestrial broadcast is the mainstay, but incorporating that digital parameter offers the listener so much more. It also brings them in and allows you to captivate that audience and retain them for longer periods of time.
Gotcha. Yep. And that's what we're finding with our little stations. I guess, one thing that's crossed my mind, and I could be way off base with this. I could be just totally foolish, but a couple other engineers in the business agree with me. I realize we're engineers. We're not programming. We're not big time owners. is that broadcasters maybe should have jumped in bed with Pandora so that they'd be on a major platform that people are familiar with. For example, I mean, if I own some radio stations in Greenville, Mississippi, how can I help remind people in Greenville that if they want to listen, to morning news and weather and some fun banter and lots of music and local information, how can I remind them to not tune into Pandora, but instead, get our web app or go to our website, or our smartphone app, I should say, or our website, and listen to our station that way. It doesn't seem like it's necessarily top of mind, where I got a smartphone in my hand, I got a dashboard in my car of a modern car, and there's Pandora. How can I solve that problem?
Sure. My opinion is that a listener has something they want to listen to. So with a regular radio station, you have different types of programming. You might have your news, you might have your weather, sports, and music. So a listener tunes in, and a large market's a good example. They tune in to a radio station. They say, I'm looking for jazz music. Or, well, actually, jazz really isn't on the radio. They're looking for top 40 radio. They punch in, that station always plays top 40. Now, a slightly smaller station, you're saying, how can I retain these people? Here's what I suggest, and what I hope the industry starts pushing towards is multiple, if you will multicast on the internet. What keeps a broadcaster, aside from maybe some royalties, from diversifying their offerings? So maybe you have an R&B station, and so your listeners are prone to listen to R&B, maybe classic R&B like a Motown. Maybe they're prone to listen to a current R&B format, and maybe they're also prone to listen to a throwback hip-hop format and a current hip-hop format. Well, what keeps us as broadcasters from offering those 4 streams, or maybe 5 streams? Maybe there's a morning show or a more content detailed program that can be incorporated that the listener can be offered. Or even, why can't we develop more advanced apps that allow you to turn on and off content? So perhaps I enjoy listening to updates or rather morning show clips that come out on a top 40 station, whereas the next guy just wants to hear the music. Why can't I turn that on and off on my app, and we can't delay some of this audio on a separate stream so that the listener is able to make that choice and be able to incorporate their preferences in, rather than us just saying this is what it is? Because that's really what Pandora does, is they allow you in some way, shape, or form to say, I dislike this or I like this, and it modifies it to your desire.
Do you have any of your stations or any of your talent do maybe a show after the show? Hey, if you want to keep listening to our zaniness, tune into our online stream or our second online stream or whatever. Is that a viable way to keep people interested?
I think for morning shows it might be, or those shows they're very heavily talked, just because it depends on the format. Here we have a throwback hip hop station and an R&B based station, so it's fairly music intensive. But I think if you have one of our stations, the throwback hip hop, has a very talented kind of, they call it Slim's Playhouse. So it's a bunch of different folks in there doing bits and different things. I think something like that could have added content where people might be willing to actually podcast or download that content afterward, or maybe even stream some type of an extended show, or maybe it's just once a week a live show on the internet.
By the way, I don't know if you saw it, but one of the guys that works at our stations, our hip-hop station, DJ Hustleman, had some nice things to say about you and your record-spinning capabilities, their talents. So that's DJ Hustleman compliments you. You're something. I'll tell you right now.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous and envious of DJ Hustleman's helmet. I want a helmet like that.
Yes.
Because if you haven't seen DJ Hustleman, and I follow him on Facebook, I stalk a lot of people, probably about 2,000 people, including you, Kurt, so watch out. He wears a helmet when he goes out, and that's his thing. And is that a real fighter jet helmet?
Actually, it's a helicopter. It's a military helicopter helmet with a glare shield on it, and it was his dad's. His dad was military, and so he wears it both because it's unusual. It's kind of cool. It was his dad's, so he's honoring his dad. And I got to tell you, the inside of that thing is nasty. It's worn out. But he puts it's a cool thing. So hey, tell you what, let me do a quick commercial break, and then let's spend just a couple more minutes talking about how you might imagine people in the future would want to connect with content creators, whether they be podcasters like us, or radio content creators, show creators. is telephony going to be part of that forever, or is that going to go away and give way to some other means? Is Snapchat or just instant video with an app talking to your people at the radio station? What's gonna be hot? Maybe something else completely. Hey, our show This Week in Radio Tech, episode 274 with Daniel Hyatt, is being brought to you in part by the folks at Axia. And I want to tell you about their console, the Radius console. I just talked to a consulting engineer yesterday and a little bit today as well about, hey, he called me and said, what's a console that's good for a college radio station? They have a control room and a production room. It would be nice if I could just basically plug stuff together and not have a whole lot of wiring between the rooms. What can we do? And I said, well, the Axia Radius is probably a great choice. I mean, it's list price for an Axia Radius console plus its mix engine called the Core 16. That's right about $6,000. It's very affordable, and so he's very interested. We, as far as I know, I passed it off to our sales department, and they're getting with him to get proper quotes out to him. So 2 rooms, 2 consoles, about $12,000 for that. And then I said, now, are they going to take phone calls there? He said, yeah, they're going to take phone calls from newsmakers and have talk shows. It's a college station. Well, add a Telos IQ6 to that mix. And the cool thing about the IQ6, it's just like the HX6 phone system, which we've talked about on the show, but it's cheaper. It doesn't have the audio inputs and outputs. It doesn't have XLR connectors for analog and AES audio inputs and outputs. It just has a live wire connector. And so therefore, the price is lower. There's a bunch of parts missing, but you don't need them if you've got Axia consoles. So the IQ6 is a 6-line phone system that just plugs one jack, live wire, into the console. And hey, these consoles, this Radius console, the Core 16 mix engine that you get for it, it has the Ethernet switch built into it. And you can connect 2 studios together just with one Cat5 or Cat6 cable to connect a gigabit connection between the 2 studios. And bam, all the sources are available in both sides. And the phone system is available in both rooms quite easily that way. Then you plug in a few of the phones, the VSET 6 phones to control the IQ6. And guess what? They're power over Ethernet. You plug them into one of the PoE jacks on the back of the Core 16. You've got power. You've got data. They're on the Axia network for live wire. And it's just so easy. So I think they're going to go with that system. And we certainly have at our radio stations in American Samoa and in Mississippi. And let's see, where else? At this very network, the GFQ network. We're talking through an Axia Radius console here right now, providing proper mix minus into my ear, into Daniel's ear. All of our guests get proper mix minus automatically. If you would check these out, low-cost audio over IP consoles, end-to-end audio over IP. And you know what? These guys that talked to me yesterday, this consultant, he said, I need 4 microphones in an adjacent studio that's all mics. Hey, no problem. Add a mic node from Axia, an X node. And just buy this one node, you've got 4 mic preamps coming in, you've got 4 headphone feeds going back out, and 1 cable will connect it right up to the other 2 consoles. You can put these mics on from either console. Check it out on the web. Go to telosalliance.com, go to Axia Audio, and then look for the Radius. There it is right there. There's the 8-fader Radius console. And you can also get the Core 16. If you need more mics, you can plug in a Core 32 to it as well. Costs a little bit more for that bigger engine with more inputs and outputs. But for most any use you're going to have, the Core 16 will work just fine. All right, thanks to Axia and the Axia Radius console. I highly recommend it for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, we're with Daniel Hyatt, and we're just about ready to go. But Daniel's going to give us his thought on how people are going to interact with their broadcaster or content creator friends in the future. Got some thoughts about that?
Well, I'm really excited because I obviously follow the advancements in technology, and especially with social networking. And I think people are getting into these tighter and tighter groups where we started a number of years ago. I remember the IRC chat rooms and Yahoo and so forth. And then we got to kind of the MySpace and Facebook era where I've got a couple thousand friends. And now we're really down to your Snapchats and Periscopes, things like that, where you're getting a tighter amount of people in your social network. Obviously, with celebrities, with Twitter and Periscope, you're going to get thousands of people. But really, for me, My Snapchats, I'm taking pictures of studios. I've got 10, 15 people on there. With my Twitter, I've only got a few people following me because we're talking back and forth about techie things. So I think we're going to have to find a way to incorporate ourselves into those social networks. I had a nice presentation this morning by a company that actually is going to allow us, or rather providing an app in the studio that allows us to call listeners back. So the listeners can interact. They can send a message that says, I absolutely love that song. I wish you would call and put me on the radio. And we're able to call them back. So it's how can you reach back to the listener? How can you reach back to those people that are listening or watching your presentation? And, I think it's just going to have to be this two-way communication variable rather than the one way that we've been used to over the last 30, 40, 50 years.
It's going to be interesting, I think. As I mentioned before, my 19-year-old daughter, I don't think would ever pick up a phone and call a radio station. She listens to radio as well as, partakes of other media sources, listening to songs from YouTube, making a playlist right there. But to discover a new song, she definitely listens to radio. But I just don't know about telephone calls. I don't know. It's going to be interesting, and I can't wait. I wish the mobile carriers would get with the program on better codecs in their phones. I don't know how you feel about this, but my wife and I are both on T-Mobile, and we both have modern phones. She has an iPhone 5. Oh, she has an iPhone 5. I have she has an iPhone 6 now, come to think of it. And I have a Samsung Note 4. When we call each other on the T-Mobile network, we're talking using AMR wideband, and it's 7.5 kilohertz of audio. It's it sounds really good, actually. I mean, well, way better than a normal telephone call costs. But if I call my daughter, who's using a different carrier, nothing wrong with that carrier, but there's no interaction between carriers using sophisticated codecs. So I call her she's on a major carrier. I can barely understand her for the horrible, cross, transcoding that's going on between, whatever T-Mobile's using for a call that goes out over the PSTN and her. Bottom line is, I couldn't put that kind of call on the air on my radio station. It sounds awful. And I guess stations are having to do that. When we finally get to the point where carriers are all standardized on something like AMR wideband, and they make that available over VoIP connections, say to broadcasters, I think we're going to live in a much better world as far as audio quality with callers. But we may end up skipping all that with apps and, maybe video calling to the station, or as with Facebook, you can make calls now to other Facebook users. Why not, make a call to your radio station with their app? Just some thoughts.
Well, I have a Note 5. I didn't realize you could actually make telephone calls on this. I thought it was only text. So, in fact, it's funny because we'll have an emergency at the station, or something will happen. It'll be a rep who needs a little bit of help with some desktop support, or it'll be something in the studio. I almost never get a telephone call anymore unless it's the remote control, and usually that's an email. But it's always somebody texting me or sending me, some kind of a message on Google Hangout or whatever else. Nobody calls anymore. So I think you're right along the lines there is how far are they going to push to develop it when everybody just uses text? Plus, the other cool thing about Google and Facebook is I think you can send people money now. So it'll just go along with my new idea to start a multi-level marketing campaign.
Yeah, there you go. Daniel, I appreciate your time. It's been very intriguing. I know we'll get to talk again. And what I'm really excited about you personally being in this business is that you have a lot of big dreams and schemes. And it's nice. It's great to see somebody who's got plans, who wants to make things better, and you're not afraid to try different technologies to get those things done. So I appreciate your comments. Thanks for keeping up with the Comproc product for those folks who want it, need it, use it, and occasionally might need some service on it.
Thank you very much for having me on.
All right, and if folks want to reach out to you, especially for the Comproc, if they're interested in that product, where could they reach you at?
The best way to reach me is directly by email, just daniel@jmhyatt.com. That's JMHYATT.com.
All right. Good deal. And we'll put something in the show notes about that, and I'll check with you on exactly what we want to put in there. Daniel Hyatt's been our guest on This Week in Radio Tech, episode 274. Chris Tobin was with us for most of the show. He's in the middle of an SBE meeting now in New York at the iHeart Radio Theater there. And thanks very much to our sponsors who have been Lavo and the Crystal Clear console, also the Telos Zipstream line of audio processors and encoders for your streaming. And then also the folks at Axia and the Axia Radius console. Love that little console. It just does a great job, and it can be part of a big audio over IP network if you want it to be. It's just very convenient. Also, thanks to Suncast for producing this episode, having working really hard, fixing internet connections when they break. And thanks also to Andrew Zarian, who is the founder and owner of the GFQ Network, for providing distribution services for us. Thanks very much to all these guys. And next week, we've got an interesting guest coming up. I'll let you know who it is by Twitter or Facebook. Check us out there. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech.